This is Join Us in France, episode 330. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we look around France and leave no stone unturned. Today, I bring you a conversation with Elyse with this question. To Airbnb or not to Airbnb? That is the question. We share our opinions and experiences and provide you with plenty of choices to research your next great place to stay in France with your family or with your friends. You've got so many choices to make, and I think it's best to narrow things down easily, and I'll tell you how I do it. If you like what we do here at Join Us in France, consider supporting us by going to patreon.com/join us and by visiting joinusinfrance.com/boutique to check out my cookbook, Join Us at the Table, and my Paris tours on the Voice Map app. The best way to stay in touch with me and with the podcast is to sign up for the newsletter at joinusinfrance.com/newsletter. Bonjour, Elyse.
Bonjour, Annie.
On this beautiful day, we are going to talk about the dark side of Airbnb, or I'm not sure what I'm going to title the episode yet. Probably, Airbnb and alternatives to our Airbnb, because we're going to start traveling again, which is great news. But maybe we should take a pause and think about what our choices are when it comes to where we stay and how we book these things.
Yes, I think just because I think we live here in Europe. I mean, I know that this is an issue to discuss even in the States and for traveling anywhere in the world. But it's true that here we have been able to see the bad effects of too much tourism and the overflow that comes with these issues that have to do with where you stay.
Yeah. Okay. So to prepare for this episode, I Googled the phrase, the dark side of Airbnb.
Literally.
Literally, yes. And the first thing that came up was a scary story about someone who got terribly sick when she rented a place in LA, and that place had mold hidden underneath the carpet. And she was planning on staying several weeks because she was doing cancer treatment in LA. Okay. So she was around doctors all the time, and the doctors, hearing her cough, said, "No, you got to get out of there right now." And so she left the premises right away. And because she had left the premises, she pretty much abandoned her right to get her money back.
I see.
Okay. So she was very upset about that, which I can certainly understand. And you hear stories like that once in a while, like on the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook. Over the years, I've heard several people complain that they had booked a long time in advance, and then 3 days or 4 days before they were supposed to come, the owner canceled.
Exactly. I've heard that story
That
too.
happens quite a bit. So you hear all kinds of story, but if you want the horror stories, you can go to a website called airbnbhell.com.
Really? Okay.
And so I went, and I typed in the search bar, I typed France. And all I could see was 4 reports. And I thought, well, 4 reports for all of France, that's not so bad.
That's not so bad.
No. But then I typed in Paris, and then there were pages and pages and pages of reports. So, I've used Airbnb myself a few times, not a ton, but a few times. And, sometimes it goes very smoothly. Sometimes it doesn't. But that's not really why I wanted to talk about it today. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is because Airbnb has had huge consequences on the tourist industry.
That's right.
And even on rentals in general, not just vacation rentals, but rentals in
It's had
general.
a huge impact on the tourist industry in relation to obviously hotels, which have to compete with them. But also, what we know of, you and I, is how it affects neighborhoods in general.
Right. And in big cities in France and other countries, it really shows.
It really shows.
Yeah. So Paris, places like Lyon, Paris, Nice, big places like that draw a lot of visitors. It makes a big difference. It's even worse for cities like New York and San Francisco, Venice. Oh goodness, Venice. Yeah.
Well, Venice is one of the worst, and Amsterdam.
Right. Right. And so some cities are taking steps to try and mitigate the problems, which is a good thing. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Don't know. But we'll see. They're trying things.
Right.
But I think as consumers, we need to give it more thought about, is that really what we want to do? Or are there equally good alternatives out there that will be just as satisfying? The housing market is a market just like any other market. Okay. So it's supply and demand. And when supply shrinks because apartment units, rental units, I guess I could call them to be generic. When rental units are taken out of the rental market, the long-term rental market, there's not enough supply, and so prices go up. That's just how it works.
That's right. That is how it works.
Yeah, there's not much anybody can do about that. Let's take an example, a personal example. As you know, and I've mentioned it on the podcast, I inherited this apartment a little south of Barcelona. It was my parents' joy to go spend several months out of the year in this apartment in their later years because the weather is lovely, but it's not in a super touristy town.
No,
okay?
It's not. Right. I can confirm.
Right. And so it's just a basic little apartment, whatever, but it sits empty most of the year. And there are a lot of French people in that same situation that have a secondary residence that maybe they share with relatives or maybe they don't, but they have a secondary place and it's empty most of the time. But they still have to pay for, all of the, sorry about that. We're outside and my dog is going crazy. So they still have to pay for the electricity and the Wi-Fi and all of these things year round. And when it's empty most of the time, it's silly. So the other alternative is you take the apartment and you put it in the long-term rental, kind of circuit. In which case, well, in my case, the apartment, it wouldn't, you can't charge a ton of rent for that kind of place because it's not that sort of town.
But it also means that if it's a long-term rental, you could not go.
Exactly. I couldn't go, and maybe I'll have people who don't pay very well or trash the place or whatever. Now there's this new alternative of, can I put it on the short-term rental market, Airbnb kind of thing? And, it sounds really good because of course, you need to invest some money. You need to get people to take care of it because I'm not there. But then you can get rentals for, 5-10 days at a time. And even if they're not very good to the apartment, they're going to go away, and new people will come in. Anyway, for an owner like me, it all sounds great. And there's a knack to getting people to leave you good reviews. Mm-hmm. And I think I could master that. And pretty soon I'd have good reviews. Okay. So what do you, it's a dilemma. Okay. It's very tempting for somebody like me to actually do that. I
say though that in the case of the situation you're talking about, which, as you mentioned, is true for many people because it happens that the French, many of them have secondary homes. Actually, as a proportion, I think it's the country where people have the most.
Yeah.
It is a legitimate thing to say, well, if this place, apartment or house is empty at least half the year, why not try and rent it out?
Right.
But it's actually also still something you own, you use. What I find as a problem is not so much that as places, and this of course is what has happened since the concept of Airbnb has been developed, is that people will buy up properties that are just for rental purposes, and therefore there's nothing left for people who really want to live there on a regular basis.
Right.
Which is a very different situation. And I don't know how many of the apartments, for instance, in Paris or in Venice were lived in before. But we do know now that Venice, Amsterdam, Barcelona are cities where there are no longer apartments for people who do want to live there on a year-long basis.
Right. Because they can make a lot more money renting it a week at a time.
Right, exactly.
And then they can still use it for themselves should they have a chance to go or whatever.
Right.
Okay. So that's a big dilemma for somebody who owns a place. And I understand that, it's, some people are going to decide to go ahead and put it on the market. Airbnb started in 2008.
Apparently it was 3 students.
It literally started in somebody's bedroom,
Amazing.
And so I don't know if you know about this, but there's this, internet archive. It's called the Wayback Machine. You can search for what websites looked like a long time ago.
Huh.
If you type Wayback Machine,
interesting.
It's internet.archive.org or something like that. Okay. And so I went and they take snapshots of websites, a few times a year. And obviously, the more popular a website becomes, the more snapshots they take.
Right.
So I started looking, I took in July once a year and I looked. So in July, 2011, their slogan was list your space. And they boasted 14,145 apartments, cities in 183 countries. That's 2011. 2012, they added a big slider on the top, beautiful apartments, and the slider was a video, which was in 2011. That was impressive, And the navigation bar said 24/7 support, how it works, sign up, list your space, that sort of thing. 2013, now they say 34,000 cities and 192 countries. I don't know how many countries there are in the world, but I think
34,000 cities seems like not a realistic number.
Well, 192 countries is probably all the countries in the world.
Probably. And
I don't know.
34,000 cities seems like an awful lot. I don't know.
Yeah. So by 2013, they're already huge.
Right.
By 2014, the slogan is welcome home. And then it says rent unique places to stay from local hosts in 190 countries. Okay, so that's a big deal because that's when they went from, this was just a rental thing to come home to your own, So that's a shift in mentality that's huge.
It's very interesting because I did read the articles that you had sent me so we could talk about this. And it's interesting because it is true that this concept, which is clever, was at first the idea of it's more authentic this way.
Right.
I remember when my stepson, who is a big adult now. I mean, a few years ago, he had to spend a few days every couple of months in a city. I honestly don't remember which city it was. And at that time, it was simply someone who rented out a room in their apartment.
Yeah.
It wasn't evacuating the apartment so that you could take it over.
Right.
And many of the rentals at the beginning were that, where the idea was you meet somebody, even if you're not hanging out with them, it gives you a kind of little bit of local color. So there's a really big shift in the idea of that. And then all of a sudden people evacuating their living space.
We did that when we went to Montreal. We set this up way too late because there are flights in the summer between Toulouse and Montreal. And we decided to go kind of on a whim. And so all we could find was this place where we were going to have a room in somebody's house. We had never done that before. And this was a couple where she had an apartment, he had an apartment. They didn't live together most of the time, but when either one of them rented out their apartment, they would go to live with the other. So he met us there. We could see his office, his bedroom, whatever. But pretty much he emptied his bedroom for us.
Yeah.
Okay. And his guest room is where our daughter stayed. And that was a little awkward, I must admit, especially since he'd come back in the daytime to work in his office.
Right. That's weird.
Okay. So it was a little odd. And I thought, oh, it might be better if we didn't do that again. Okay. So the next time we did this, it was in New York, and we rented an apartment in New York. And by then, this was a couple who had vacated their apartment to go be with family in Israel for like 3 weeks. And so for those 3 weeks, they rented out the apartment. Right. But it was pretty clear that they had, they had packed their things in boxes,
their personal things,
off to the side. And so that was also like a home. I mean, the owner occupied the apartment.
It's kind of like when you rent out your home when you go away on vacation, which happens more and more.
Right.
And you take away the few precious personal things you don't want anybody to have access to.
Right. Or you make room for them in your closet. Like you emptied a couple of closets so they have room. Anyway, so they really evolved towards the idea of you're going to be home when you go to somebody else's house, right? And in 2015, their slogan became "Belong Anywhere." Okay, so you can see the marketing idea here. 2016, the slogan is "Live There." Okay. 2017, they say, their site says, book unique homes and experience a city like a local. Okay. I mean, like a local is huge. That's what Rick Steves has been selling for decades. To him, you show up in Paris with his book under your arm, and that's it. You're a local.
You can't be a local. You can't be a local.
That's the reality. Is you cannot
you
ever.
Cannot.
I cannot be a local anywhere besides where I live.
And you cannot be a local even if you're renting or staying in a place that's outside of the heavy tourist areas. You are not a local.
Right.
You are somebody who is coming for a week or two.
Right.
And you are walking around looking at things.
But you do understand that I do understand the attraction, because going home after a day of, you've been touring all day, you've eaten at a restaurant at lunch, and you're tired, you go back. Right. So if you go back to a hotel, that's not your daily life.
Right.
But if you go back to an apartment or a house, it feels more like you're going home at the end of the day.
I can understand, depending on the circumstances. First of all, I honestly and personally have never used Airbnb. I've done a lot of bed and breakfasts, which is really a kind of precursor to Airbnb.
Yes.
Where you go and you have rooms in what was probably somebody's house or is still somebody's house, but the rooms are very lovely and they are more like hotel rooms, but you have a beautiful homemade breakfast included, and there's usually a nice little living room or place you can sit afterwards. And I kind of like that.
Yeah.
But it's very clear that it is really more like the old auberge. It's really more like that. And I've never felt the need to stay in an apartment, which is very different from when people now in France do things like renting what we call a gîte here, which is a whole big house in a space with a garden usually.
Right.
Which
and that's
is
usually
bigger.
For longer term.
It's not even necessarily for longer term. It's usually for more people.
Yeah.
So if, for instance, if you have 4 adults, if you have 2 families, if you have children, very often for, usually it's a minimum of a week, but it can be a week, it can be 2 weeks. But somehow it doesn't seem the same as the whole thing of Airbnb because they're houses that are outside of the city center.
Yeah.
And they're much more for groups of people to be able to stay together in a place.
Right. Yes. And so if you're going to Paris, that's not going to be an option.
It's not going to be an option.
I don't think there are gîtes in Paris.
No, I don't think there are. I know some people who have done Airbnb wherever they go because they have special food needs.
Yes.
And that is, you can understand that.
Yes.
Because you need to make your own food because you can't always eat out in a restaurant.
Right.
I can get that. What I find unfortunate, and I especially know that about Venice and Amsterdam, is that it has kicked a huge percentage of the population out of the city because it has made apartments unavailable and it has raised the rent so high that locals can't afford it anymore.
Right. There's a study that in New York City, it's 1 year rents went up 8 to 11%, depending on the neighborhood. So if you had a lot of Airbnb in a neighborhood, that neighborhood they jacked up the rates that much.
And these are already cities that are expensive.
Exactly.
That's the problem too. I mean, this is, I in the article, one of the articles, it was talking about London and Barcelona. London is an extremely expensive city.
Yeah.
To have 20% of the apartments be unavailable and then have the rents go up in general, and it's already a very expensive city, is very, very hard.
Yeah,
it's really hard.
No, but you're right. If you have dietary needs, or if the other reason that I think is a very good reason to consider Airbnb is if you're traveling with a big group, or with if you have 4 kids or something. Yeah. It's kind of hard in Paris to find hotels that will accommodate that many people without selling you different rooms.
Exactly. And which eventually winds up being much more expensive if you have to do that many different rooms.
Right. Because even if your kids, and I remember when we were traveling with Marianne, we went to London one year when she was little, and we were meeting her grandmother's choir. And so we didn't have a choice of the hotel. But so what we had to do is get 2 rooms, because the rooms were tiny. You could not add an extra bed. We couldn't. So we had to have her across the hall, but she was young enough that it was not comfortable.
Right.
So I ended up sleeping in, one of us, I can't remember which one did it, but one of us ended up sleeping in the kid bed, and one adult slept with her. So that was not happy experience either. So I understand that sometimes Airbnb really offers some good solutions for you.
The other thing is, a few years ago we went to Naples, and actually I did go on Airbnb to see what they were offering.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure how this works, because what I found, maybe it's particular to certain countries, certain cities, was mostly simply rooms anyway. It wasn't apartments at all, or it was either a studio or it was a room in what basically is what the Italians call a pensione. So it didn't make any difference. So in the end, I just went right back to my good old bed and breakfast situation, because I found that why not,
Yeah. So in Paris, last time I rented an Airbnb was in Paris, and it was a place I had spent hours reading reviews. That's my biggest complaint about Airbnb, is that it is so difficult to get just basic information about a place, because you have to read all the reviews. If you don't read all the reviews, you don't know really what the place is like. Because, of course, they're going to put favorable photos.
Right.
Obviously. Duh. But if you don't read the reviews, you're not going to know that there were problems with the key or, stuff like that. That really matters, because that one Airbnb, the last one I used, I was supposed to meet family. So we had family from the U.S. who were going to Paris. And I told them I would meet them in Paris, and my husband was going to come a few days later because he was working. And I was supposed to meet them in front of Notre Dame for a concert. The choir boys were giving a concert.
Right.
Well, I never made it to the concert because the key wasn't there. And there I was in front of my Airbnb waiting for somebody to show up with a key, because there was a lock. I could open the lock. I had the right, you need to have a code to open the lockbox. It was fine. When I opened it, no key in there. Okay. So then you're in Airbnb hell, honestly, because you don't have the person's phone number. You can email them, and then you hope that they will see the email.
Right.
Okay. And it took hours. I arrived like at 2 p.m, which was the earliest available time to get there. And then I wasn't in there till 7 p.m. Wow. Hours. Just sitting there in the hall like an idiot, waiting for them to send somebody. And this was a situation where it was a young couple who had come into some money, and they had bought several apartments in Paris to rent. So they had a cleaning lady that they would send around and the cleaning lady left in a rush and forgot to put the key back in the box. Okay. It wasn't no big deal, but they had 3 apartments in this beautiful Haussmannian building. They had never lived in any of them, because when I called, after this whole kerfuffle with the key, I had the person's phone number. And so I talked to her, and she was very surprised that I was French because we had done the whole exchange in English on the website. And she was like, oh, it's Française? Oh. You know, like she didn't really want French people. She wanted to rent to tourists from far away. Anyway, it was not a very good experience. That was my last experience. And I must admit, I totally understand when people say, you know, as soon as you have the smallest little issue, it can take hours to resolve because it's not like you can walk down to the reception. To the reception and say, oh, I'm sorry, there's mold in my bathroom. Can I change rooms? Right. You know,
I think my problem with Airbnb is really the fact that there are cities, particularly the cities that I have a special feeling for, like Venice and Amsterdam, that are making it impossible for people to live in because they're exploiting this idea of the Airbnb. I'm not a fan, and I'm not a big fan of. I can understand if you're staying in a place for a long time, you're not going to spend 3 weeks or 4 weeks paying rent in a hotel and then having to go out to a restaurant every night. And so there are people who do sublet an apartment. But somehow for me, it's not the same if it's someone who really has an apartment and they know that certain months of the year they go away and they want to rent, than the idea of exploiting property like this couple.
Yeah.
And just putting it on the market in cities where housing is really a problem. And, you know, in Amsterdam, I don't remember, obviously it was before the COVID. So I guess it was in 19, there was a huge demonstration in the city center of Amsterdam because by virtue of having so many Airbnbs, plus the fact that Amsterdam is a city that has an enormous number of hotels anyway, what happened was that the city center was losing its local population.
Right.
And people were fed up with it. People were just fed up with the idea that they would have to live so far out of the city center because it was being invaded. Like Barcelona has also started putting tourists go home up. You know, I mean, they really have signs, tourists go home.
Yeah.
I think that regulating it so that it's only a certain number of days a year is the most reasonable way of dealing with it.
Yeah, I think if you, I mean, for me, my rule is if I'm not staying 5 days or more, no Airbnb.
Yeah.
Okay. Because, and already that's going to eliminate a lot of possible renters.
Yeah.
Because most people don't stay 5 days.
In the same place.
Even in Paris.
Yeah.
Even in Amsterdam or in Venice.
Do you have any idea what the average number of nights?
Okay. So people who follow us tend to be Francophiles and they stay longer.
They stay longer.
Yeah. But your average bear doesn't stay in Paris that long.
3 nights?
Yeah, 3 nights, maybe. There's whole books, you know, see all of Paris in 3 days.
That's true.
You know, yeah. So there you go. So I've used Airbnb plenty in lots of different places. My daughter had used one in Venice and she had this problem with hot water. They didn't have hot water until the last day and they were there for 5 days. You know, it takes a long time to get any little problem resolved. And you might think, oh, hot water, it's okay. You know, it's no big deal. Well, I'm sorry, but you know, you want hot water. You want, at the end of a long day, you want to have a shower and you prefer it if it's hot, you know. So what do you do if you want to look around? Where else can you look? For me, if you want the authentic local experience, you should go to a bed and breakfast.
Yeah.
Which in French we call chambre d'hôte.
Right.
Okay. Because that's not just BS marketing. You actually have the person living there. Maybe they share the house, but they live nearby anyway, and they will welcome you and they will serve you breakfast and talk to you and whatever.
And usually very good breakfasts.
Yes. And a lot of these bed and breakfasts and chambre d'hôte in France are actually owned by foreigners who want to move to France. It's a very good business for them because we get a lot of English speaking visitors. Right. And you know, if you're from Australia and you want to move to France, maybe the answer is buy a nice property, fix it up, and be a bed and breakfast. That's, you know, it's a good side business for people who already have some money anyway, right? So I thought, okay, so I'm going to type in bedandbreakfast.com, see what happens. Well, that redirected me to VRBO, which is another company like Airbnb that rents mostly apartments.
Ah.
Mostly. So they just bought bedandbreakfast.com. And so if you want to see a unique bed and breakfast, the real bed and breakfast, you can't do it. It's not easy to do. But the one website that does this really, really well, in my opinion, is booking.com.
Yeah.
Because I know that it's not sexy like Airbnb. They don't, that's because they give you a lot of information. Okay. You can go to booking.com, and I am an affiliate of booking.com. So if you're kind enough to start your search from Join Us in France, then I get a little commission, which is nice. I've been using booking.com forever because I like their site. You can go to the search bar, and like the last few episodes, we've been talking about places in the Lot that are beautiful. Or you can just say Lot, France.
Yeah.
And it will show a bunch of possibilities. On the left, you have a sidebar where you can filter down.
That's right.
And one of the filters is bed and breakfast. And if you want an honest-to-goodness bed and breakfast where they serve you breakfast, communal breakfast, you can get that very easily with Booking.com. They also do apartments, guest houses, campsites, hotels, chalets, holiday parks, villas, homestays. So a homestay, I suppose, is where you
stay with someone.
And
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. Have like if you want to speak French, well, homestay might be a good thing to do. You can do hostels, youth hostels, farm stays, lodges, luxury tents. Anyway, you can filter down, and they also let you filter down with accessibility. I even saw one of the checkboxes is the room is labeled in Braille. Now, I know that not a lot of people need that, but if, good luck finding that on Airbnb. Like, it's never going to happen. So, and once you say Lot, or imagine Dordogne, you want to go to the Dordogne, but you're not sure where. So you type in Dordogne. And if you scroll down, one of the filters is specific cities in the Dordogne.
Right.
So then you can just say, oh, well, maybe Sarlat would be good. Let's look at Sarlat. Maybe I should stay in Bergerac instead. And so you just, select that instead. They make it so easy, and it's all in the search and the filtering. Of course, they also do reviews. Okay.
Well, yeah.
You can read the reviews if you like, but you don't have to spend 2 days reading all the reviews.
But I have used Booking a lot for quite a few years, and I have used it more for hotels, but I also have used it last year with my sisters. We were planning a trip to England, and we went through Booking to look for bed and breakfasts in England.
Yeah.
We got exactly what we wanted. Unfortunately, we couldn't go because of the COVID, but we had everything down. From a point of view of the renter, that is, from the client's point of view, they offer everything you need. And it is also true, though, with Booking, that you have to have the patience to look at the reviews, because you have to know how to read the reviews, because like everything else, if you just read 1 or 2 reviews, you're not going to get the real picture. You have to really have a certain amount of patience to see what really comes up often enough. But
at least you can, to begin with, you can select whether the place has a parking lot or not.
Oh, sure.
You can select, if you know you're going to need a place to park, then just check that box. And they're not going to show you places that don't have a parking lot.
That's true.
And if you want a place with a swimming pool, you can check.
Right.
I want a swimming pool.
I mean, my problem with Booking, and I've used it really an enormous amount. I've only had one very bad experience with them, but it was a very specific kind of situation and whatever. But I would say that, because I know from the other side, and you do too, that they take a huge amount of commission from any place that lists with them, So if you go directly to some of these places, you're better off, honestly.
Well, the owner is better off.
The owner is much better off.
And I suppose you could use those sites to select a place and then search to see if they have their own website or whatever. And that's fine too. And it's
fine.
There's nothing wrong with doing that if you want to do that. So another one to look at. So we've mentioned Gîte de France is a very good site. I'm pretty sure they do English.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Of course they do.
Relais et Château in France is also a very good site. It's a little bit more expensive, but these days, because there's so little tourism, you might get a fabulous deal at Relais et Château, and they are often in the most unlikely places in the boonies.
Out of the city center.
Out of the city centers. Sometimes in the city, but usually not. Yeah. Okay. You have the occasional chateau in the city. Now, there's another one called the Plum Guide, and that one it's like Airbnb, but they visit the places. So they don't list anybody who applies. Okay. So they will go check out like the linens, all the little details. If you are, and obviously they don't have as many places listed. Okay. But if you want a well-appointed place, which is my case, I'm really, it's such a turn off. You show up at an Airbnb and it's like an IKEA bedroom. Like it's an IKEA showroom. They have everything IKEA. As cheap as they can buy it, they will put it in that room because they're just investors.
Of
really.
course.
So that's the Plum Guide is one possibility. A homestay is also another possibility.
And holiday homes.
Holiday homes. There you go. So if you want to take the time to Google around a little bit, you will find some good stuff. One that I've done that I've liked very much is having people actually stay at my house. Now, I've never done it at anybody else's house. I've never been the person
you've
staying.
Never been the person staying.
Right. But I have hired people to come from a website called Mind My House. It's free for me to list my place. And when we go somewhere for 2 or 3 weeks, there's no way I'm putting my dogs in a kennel for 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. So since I have 2 dogs and 1 cat anyway, it would be expensive. So I can go to Mind My House, list my place. And by now I have several people have reviewed us and we've reviewed them.
How do you know who to?
At first, you just read the reviews.
No, but I mean, how do you know who to choose to stay at your house?
Well, they will apply. So you list your property for a specific date and you post some photos or whatever. And then you say, okay, I'm looking for someone for those dates. And several people will respond and will apply for the job. And obviously you describe, I have 2 dogs and I want them walked every day. I say that my old dog needs medication, that sort of thing.
So you really have to trust that they'll do what they say they'll do.
And they always have. We've done this 5 or 6 times and we've never had a problem. People are very good, so we even let them use our car. We let them use one of our cars because we're kind of out of the city center a little bit. One couple who dog sat for us, they tried to use the car, but they couldn't drive a shift. And at that time we didn't have a automatic car. We do now. But Mind My House has been very good and it's very cheap because I don't end up paying these people. They just come, they get free rent for X amount of time and,
I would assume that works when a minimum of a certain length of time.
Oh, yeah. You don't want to do that for less than 2 weeks.
Less than 2 weeks.
And we only do it if we're going for a while, because, what we tend to do is either a weekend getaway, like maybe 2 nights or 3 nights max, or
a
long trip when we go to the US, visit family or something like that. So for the longer trips that are usually at least 2 weeks, we get somebody to come stay. And it's never been a problem. I've listed my house, but of course by now, several people have reviewed us too. So they've said, oh yeah, the house is nice. It's comfortable. The dogs are fine. The cat will scratch you maybe, but
right.
She's a cat.
Where is she?
I don't know. She'll come and scratch you soon. But anyway, so for me, that was a good thing. And I guess you can arrange home exchanges. There's all sorts of things like that you could do. But for me, Booking and Mind My House have been the 2 that I've returned to several times because they work.
But I think let's go back to the beginning because I know that was kind of the reason you wanted to do this. The whole question of what do you do if you want to stay in a city for less than a week and you don't want to be part of this overly abusive system of Airbnb? Because it really is. I mean, there's a whole amount of, it is very problematic. I mean, I hate the idea of going to stay in a city where I see people with signs, tourists go home, you're taking our places, you're taking our apartments away. It's kind of a hard, it's a hard thing to do. I have people in my family who like staying in hotels, which I actually do, to be honest. But staying in a hotel basically means that you eat out. You eat out either if it's a hotel that has dining facilities or you eat out locally. But I like that because I like discovering places and I don't have to eat in fancy places and things like that. But I think that it's true that if you're going to only stay in a place for 2, 3, even 4 nights, it's kind of hard if you have a succession of people like that taking up all kinds of apartments that somebody, you get somebody who comes for, let's take even a student who comes for a semester to study abroad, or I know someone who subletted an apartment in Montpellier because she's working at the university. She got a year contract at the university. You have to have apartments for people like that,
Right. Somebody on the podcast suggested something. I think it was like, it was specifically for professors who go for the teaching year. Yeah. So there are sites that specialize in that as well, and it's true that there are a lot of nuisances. Locals report nuisances because people are on vacation. They come and go. They get a little tipsy. They are noisy. They forget to take out the trash. They leave things open when they shouldn't.
Right.
They unlock things they shouldn't, whatever, So the neighbors get really annoyed. And in France, it's true that your recourse is to tell the city, my neighbor has this illegal rental unit going on, because you're supposed to pay taxes when you take income from a rental unit. You're supposed to pay taxes. And a lot of people don't, they try not to. And so the neighbors will go there first. They will, talk to the taxman and say, hey, is this guy paying his taxes? Because this has to stop, because it's different people all the time. And sure, you think, oh, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be delightful. But but I bet once you've had a bottle of rosé, you might not be as fun to be around as the neighbors would like. I don't know. I
mean, there are certain cities that have a 90-day limit on how many days a year you can rent. But that implies that it's a place that basically you are in. It's not a place you have bought up just for the sake of renting it out. People buy apartments.
In Paris, that's what's mostly, that's investors. In Paris,
that's the problem.
It's investors. People just, even if it's a family, if you inherit a bunch of cash and you don't know where to park it, one of the easiest things you can do is buy a bunch of apartments and start a small company that will just rent them out on Airbnb. I mean, in Nice, recently, one of the last times I did Airbnb, it was Nice with my friend Brenda. They have whole realtors who do nothing but manage these Airbnb apartments. So all the owner had to do is just sign a contract with the management company. If you have a question or if something is not to your liking, you can actually go to the office and say, look, I'm having a problem with this or that is broken, or I can't figure out how to make this or that work. Okay. But most other places, you have cleaning people. They don't have an office. It's just people who will just hire a cleaning service to come and drop off the keys with, there's a keypad, just like realtors in the US. It looks very much like that, And so those are more of a problem. And you don't know, as a person renting, you don't really know what sort of an apartment this is. Because they don't make people list whether they live in that apartment part-time or not. Mm-hmm. It's not one of the selection criteria on Airbnb. You can find out if somebody has left a review saying, oh, actually, this is just an investor doing this. then you'll know. But most people don't think like that. They're not going to mention that in a review because it seems irrelevant, right? It seems like, why do you care if it's an investor or not? Well, it makes a big difference to locals.
Yeah.
Because that takes out units out of the local rental market. So,
I mean, the statistics I read were actually amazing. I knew about this, but in cities like London and Barcelona, it's really become a huge problem. I'm less worried about it from the point of view of the quality of the place you stay. Although I must say that in the last year and a half, because of COVID, I've been reading a lot of articles since we've been going through this kind of accordion thing of open up, close up, open up, close up, right? Yeah. And people have been writing to various sites saying, like if I have to go someplace and travel, which is safer from a sanitary point of view. And the reality is a hotel is safer because they are required every single day to control and clean. And they are supervised much more than an Airbnb.
Right. And they usually have to have ventilation systems.
And they have to have ventilation and everything
hotel
else,
doesn't get away with not having an apartment properly ventilated, whereas many people in France have apartments that are not properly ventilated. It's just a fact. Yeah.
I mean, there's that. But I guess from the point of view, not so much of the person who wants to rent, but just from the point of view of being in cities. I mean, from traveling, I'm a city person. I like traveling to different cities in Europe. And, the idea, especially, I have to say, I mean, I have this special place in my heart for Venice, which I've been to many times. To know, having seen a documentary recently, that 25% of the apartments stay empty 3/4 of the time because they've been reserved only for Airbnb rentals.
Right.
And that the masses of the people who used to live in Venice have been forced to leave.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in a city where the only other people I see are tourists.
True. Good point. But on the web, when we discussed this on Facebook, somebody took me to task with this whole question of, well, you either support rich apartment owners or rich hotel owners. But I think there's a difference because hotels really are not in the same category for locals as other accommodations.
No.
Hotels, we have hotels and they will stay your hotel forever.
Not only that, but there obviously are big chain hotels, but in most cities, there are lots of small hotels that are run by individuals.
Yeah. So my recommendation, if you want a bed and breakfast, poke around, you can just take the few minutes to type, I want to go to Bergerac. Okay. Bergerac bed and breakfast. And you will find a bunch of people you can go to directly to rent from them. Or if you want to get some inspiration, maybe go to booking.com and let them select a few things for you. But I think we need to be a little bit more, especially when we're not staying very long. It might be better if we don't automatically just go, I'll get an Airbnb, because I don't know. It has some downsides that we've discussed at length. So.
I think that the bed and breakfast or even the little hotel, that if you go to a little hotel in a town, I mean, not necessarily in a humongous city, but they also will sometimes give you hints about places to see, places to eat. It's not the same situation as if you're in one of these big things, where nobody knows who you are and you put your key down and you leave and stuff
and
like
I think
that,
anymore Airbnb is less personable than a bed and breakfast or even a small family-owned hotel. It's less personable because chances are you're going to be in an Airbnb that's owned by a corporation that just wants to make a good return on their investment.
I would be interested to know. I would say that out of the big cities, that's probably not true. I don't know. I mean,
so there's some of both. The thing is, you can't tell. Airbnb does not want you to figure it out. At first, their whole deal was you could only rent if you lived there yourself.
Right.
That was the rule. It had to be your house, your apartment,
right,
that you were vacating for a certain amount of time and that you were renting out. That hardly ever happens. hardly ever happens anymore because there's big money.
Yeah.
You could make so much. So, they just, especially in big cities that attract a lot of tourists. So by now it's a lot of investors. And and of course hotels are also owned by investors. So that's not really a superb argument. But I think as far as the personal touch, you will do better going to a homestay or a bed and breakfast or chambre d'hôte or gîte than any Airbnb you could find out there.
I was just thinking about an Airbnb. No, not an Airbnb. Sorry, I'm getting big bed and breakfast. But there are too many B's in all of this. It's like a bed and breakfast that my husband and I stayed in for once, very rare occasion. He actually did the booking. I was terrified of what it was going to be, to be honest. I mean, he's never done this before. Up in Brittany. And it was a woman who had this old farmhouse that had kind of, I don't even know what you call it, another outlying building that she turned into 3 or 4 nice bedrooms, and it was just lovely. It was one of those things where you would never have known it existed, but he did indeed go, I think it was to Booking or one of those, and went for bed and breakfast, so chambre d'hôte.
Right.
And it was really charming.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, you can get great experiences. Well, okay, Elyse, thank you so much.
You are welcome, Annie.
All right. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing so. You can see them at patreon.com/join us. Patreon, join us, no spaces or dashes. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you for many years now. You are wonderful. And a shout out this week to new patron Bernadette Ferrandes. Thank you so much for becoming a patron and making this podcast possible. I tested the new forum for patrons this week. My thanks to all of you patrons who gave it a try. It was okay, but I decided to dedicate the Addicted to France site for groups and forums for my patrons, donors, and guests. It's not quite ready yet, but we're getting close. I will message patrons via Patreon to let them know. And if you were a guest on the podcast and would like a login to Addicted to France, its forum and groups, drop me a line, Annie@joinusinfrance.com. This Sunday, I'll be visiting one of France's most beautiful villages, a place called Auvillard in the Tarn-et-Garonne. It's one of the places competing for the favor of being one of French people's favorite villages, le village préféré des Français, for 2021. I think Elyse will join me and we'll go over there. I'll bring my electric bike and my recording equipment and we'll shoot a nice video for my patrons. Look for that next week, patrons. Elyse, how is your Patreon going?
My Patreon is going along very nicely. I guess I've always liked snails, so it's going a lot at a kind of snail's pace. I have one shout out to do this time to Sandra. I think that's how you would pronounce her name. I want to thank you very, very much, Sandra, for your very generous patronage. And I would like to thank every other patron that I have so far. It does really help so very much. It gives me confidence. It motivates me. And it helps the pocket a little bit at the same time. So thank you so much, and I hope to have more patrons soon.
Thank you very much. And to join Elyse's patronage, you go to patreon.com/ElyseArt, ELYSART. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annie.
And this week I'll be doing a couple of itinerary consults. I haven't done one in a while, and it feels like you're getting ready to come back to France and want some help with your itinerary. That's wonderful. It'll cost you $50, but you get a custom itinerary that will fit your needs and save you a lot of time. Email Annie@joinusinfrance.com to set that up and write itinerary review in the subject line. This week in French news, honestly, it's depressing. COVID is nowhere near done here. We need more vaccines. And Macron almost admitted that he was wrong not doing the same thing the Trump administration did, which is prepay for massive amounts of vaccine doses long before it was a sure thing that vaccines could be effective or safe or made that quickly. It's not every day you'll hear me give credit to the Trump administration, but they did the right thing when it came to ordering crazy amounts of vaccines before anyone knew if a vaccine could ever work. Macron said he hopes every French adult will be able to make an appointment for a vaccine by the end of the summer. Officially, summer ends on September 21st. Let me repeat that. The end of the summer. That's 5 months later than the vaccine schedule being rolled out in the US. So please be patient. Don't plan on visiting this summer unless a vaccine passport is put in place. I haven't heard any more on that yet, but I will keep you posted as soon as I hear anything. This week I bought a 49-euro bread machine from Lidl, the German massive grocery store that sells all sorts of things, including bread machines. I'm going through the recipe book and it's really good. I've made plain white bread and it was good, and brioche. It was very good. Both were great. Next up, I'll try rye bread, aka pain de seigle in French. Pain de seigle. Who knows? I might even try to make a Reuben sandwich or a pastrami sandwich or something. This week I listened to a really pleasant book called Muzzled by Eileen Brady, DMV. An honest-to-goodness veterinarian writing a book where the animals behave like animals and the people murder each other. It was great because everything she brought up was totally something animals would do. If you know animals, you know they could. This was all totally possible. Whereas a lot of books that have animals in them, it's like, you've never met a dog, have you? That was a great listen. I recommend it. It was a nice break from books about Napoleon. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/330, where you can see a recap of what we've discussed with Elyse, as well as links to relevant resources. And if you enjoy the show, please introduce a friend to the podcast, show them how to listen. We're everywhere, and you can even ask your smart speaker to play Join Us in France. And of course, you can listen on joinusinfrance.com. Next week on the podcast, an episode about Avignon with Elyse. Beautiful, beautiful place in Provence. And have you heard about its great festival? That's one of the great joys of spending time in France, is going to the Avignon festival. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France travel podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2021 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.